I had a lot of requests to do a more comprehensive video on Siener van Rensburg. After a lot of research and help from my viewers, here it is. Feel free to share what you know in the comments along with suggestions. Part 1. The man behind the name. There is something about the land around Potchefstroom that feels unfinished, as if history there never fully settled. It is in this landscape that Nicolaas Peter Johannes Jansz van Rensburg was born on the 3rd of August, 1864, on a farm called Parmeerfontein. Nothing about his early life suggested that his name would travel far beyond that quiet stretch of veldt. He grew up in a world defined by hardship and repetition. His education lasted only a few weeks. He never learned to write, and his reading remained almost entirely limited to the Bible. His worldview was narrow, but deeply rooted. Scripture was not just belief, it was structure, explanation, and truth. In that environment, everything unusual demanded meaning, and every unexplained experience carried spiritual weight rather than doubt. He married Anna Sophia Kruger and built a large family, living the life expected of a Boer farmer. There was no ambition toward leadership, no desire for attention. Those who later described him emphasized this again and again. He was not charismatic in the usual sense. He did not dominate a room. He did not persuade through force of personality. He spoke plainly, and often reluctantly, choosing his words carefully and only when necessary. And then came the visions. They did not arrive as voices or commands. They came as images, sudden, complete, and often disturbing. He would see scenes unfolding as if he were watching from a distance, animals in conflict, people moving in confusion, landscapes shifting under pressure. He did not always understand what he was seeing. He simply described it, often in short, direct phrases without embellishment. That limitation is critical, because it meant the visions were never instructions. They were raw material, symbols waiting to be interpreted. A bull could represent a nation. A river could represent danger. A gathering could represent political change. But none of that came from him directly. The meaning always emerged afterward, shaped by those who heard him and needed the visions to make sense. The name Siener was given by others. He never claimed to be a prophet. In fact, his reluctance may have made him more believable. He spoke when he felt compelled to, and then he stopped. No repetition, no reinforcement, no attempt to convince or persuade beyond the initial telling. And yet, patterns began to emerge. Some of his descriptions appeared to align, in unsettling ways, with real events. Not perfectly, not consistently, but often enough to raise attention. In a deeply religious society already primed to see divine patterns in the world, this was enough to shift perception. Stories began to spread, not loudly, but steadily. Still, doubt never disappeared. His visions were too symbolic, too open-ended. The same image could mean different things to different people. And yet, that very ambiguity allowed them to spread. People could find their own meaning in them, and once meaning is personal, it becomes difficult to dismiss. As tensions in South Africa escalated toward war, that search for meaning intensified. Because when uncertainty grows, so does the need to believe that someone, somewhere, might see what is coming, even if only in fragments. Part 2. War without a weapon. When the Second Boer War erupted, it transformed everything. Men left farms and families behind to fight an empire. It was not a conventional war of fixed positions, but one of movement, ambush, and constant uncertainty. Into this unstable environment stepped Siener van Rensburg, not as a soldier but as something far less defined and far more difficult to measure. He never carried a weapon. He never fired a shot. Instead, he moved with the commandos, offering what he believed were warnings drawn from his visions. He became associated with leaders like Koos de la Rey and Christian de Wet, not as an official advisor, but as a figure whose presence carried weight. He listened, observed, and occasionally spoke, and when he did, people paid attention, even if they were unsure why. At Rietkoel in 1901, he reportedly saw danger before it arrived. He described sudden disruption, movement, confusion, capture. He urged the camp to relocate, not with panic, but with quiet urgency. Some listened. Others dismissed the warning as unnecessary caution. When the British attack came, those who remained were captured. The incident spread quickly, reinforcing the idea that ignoring him carried risk. Another moment involved a wet. Van Rensburg described water rising, blocking movement, but also a narrow path of escape, something hidden, not obvious to the eye. The image was unclear, but specific enough to consider. De Wet later avoided capture near a flooded river. Whether coincidence or not, the alignment strengthened belief among those already inclined to trust him. At Tweebosch, where de la Rey achieved one of the most significant Boer victories, later accounts connected Van Rensburg's earlier visions to British vulnerability. These connections are difficult to verify in sequence, but they became part of the narrative that surrounded him, growing stronger with repetition. But belief is not neutral. Because even when his visions were unclear, they influence behavior. Commanders considered possibilities they might otherwise ignore. Men watched more carefully. Timing, movement, and risk were sometimes judged through a different lens, not instead of strategy, but alongside it. Yet there was danger in that. Some fighters began to rely too heavily on his warnings, assuming danger would always be revealed in advance. This created a subtle shift from caution to expectation. And in a war built on unpredictability, expectation can become a liability. Even among leadership, opinions differed. Some respected him deeply. Others tolerated him without conviction. A few dismissed him entirely. But none could completely remove him from the atmosphere of the war. Because war creates pressure that logic alone cannot always carry. And in that pressure, even uncertain insight can feel like guidance, especially when survival depends on seeing what others cannot. Part 3. The Visions in Detail. To understand Siener van Rensburg, you have to examine the visions not as abstract ideas, but as described experiences, structured images with movement, tension, and outcome. The black bull and red bull vision stands at the center. He described two bulls facing each other on open ground. The red bull charged repeatedly, aggressive and forceful, driving the black bull backward across the dust. The ground shook under their weight. At first, the red bull dominated, pressing forward with speed and strength. But as the struggle continued, its movements became slower, less controlled. The black bull absorbed the pressure, step by step, refusing to collapse. There was a sense of endurance rather than victory. Eventually, the red bull faltered, staggered, and collapsed into the dust, exhausted. The black bull did not pursue or celebrate, it simply remained standing. The image ends not with triumph, but with survival. The river vision is more complex and layered. He described standing at a crossing where water began to rise unnaturally fast. What had been a shallow passage turned into a violent current, brown and thick, carrying debris. People gathered along the bank, unsure whether to cross. Some attempted it too early and were swept away, disappearing beneath the surface. Others hesitated too long, and the water rose higher, making crossing nearly impossible. Then, almost hidden, there appeared a narrow path, shallower, calmer, but difficult to see unless one looked carefully. Those who found it crossed safely. The scene carries urgency, hesitation, and consequence, emphasizing timing as much as danger. The sisal plant vision is striking in its stillness. He described a rigid plant rooted firmly in the ground, its long, sharp leaves extending outward in all directions like blades. Around it, people gathered, not randomly, but in clusters, almost arranged. They stood in positions, forming shapes without realizing it. The plant itself did nothing, yet everything organized around it. There was a feeling of structure without movement, control without force. This has often been interpreted as a system or institution, something that shapes behavior simply by existing. The family capture vision carries a quieter, more personal tension. He described seeing women and children moving together, surrounded but not violently handled. There were guards present, but the control was calm, almost procedural. The people being taken did not fully understand what was happening at first. There was confusion before fear. Some looked back, others carried small belongings. The scene was slow, almost deliberate, which made it more unsettling. It was not chaos, it was inevitability. He also described burning land in sequence, not random destruction. Fires appeared in lines, moving across fields in a controlled pattern. One farm would burn, then another further away, as if something invisible guided the spread. Smoke layered into the sky, thick and dark, blocking out light. The land behind the flames was left empty, stripped of use. The movement of fire felt intentional rather than accidental. Another vision involved a wagon stuck in deep mud. He described oxen straining, pulling with all their strength, but the wheels sank deeper with each effort. The more force applied, the less progress was made. Around the wagon, people argued, some insisting to push forward, others urging retreat. No decision brought immediate relief. The image suggests struggle without progress, effort without result. He also spoke of a flock of birds suddenly taking flight, rising all at once from the ground in a chaotic burst. They circled briefly, disorganized, before settling again in a different place. The sudden movement carried a sense of alarm, as if something unseen had disturbed them. Another detailed image describes men walking along a narrow path between two dangers, on one side a steep drop, on the other something approaching, unseen but felt. The path was just wide enough, but required careful balance. Those who rushed risked falling. Those who hesitated risked being overtaken. These visions are not vague impressions. They are scenes with structure, tension, and consequence. And their power lies in how real they feel, without ever becoming fully fixed in meaning. Part 4: Visions Beyond the War. After his death in 1926, the visions of Siener van Rensburg expanded beyond their original context. What had once been tied closely to the Anglo-Boer War began to drift into a wider, more uncertain space, where interpretation carried as much weight as the original image. One vision describes lines of soldiers moving in perfect formation across open land, unlike the scattered movement of Boer commandos. They advanced in straight lines, synchronized, almost mechanical in their precision. Their movement was steady and relentless, not driven by urgency but by system. Behind them came flashes of light, distant explosions that did not require close contact. Smoke rose in columns, and the sound of conflict seemed removed, as if destruction had become less personal and more distant. The scale was larger than anything seen before, suggesting warfare that no longer depended on individual courage, but on coordination and force. Another vision shifts away from open land into something more structured. He described crowds filling a built environment, possibly a town or city, where buildings stood intact but order had begun to break down. People gathered in large numbers, but instead of unity, there was tension. Groups moved against each other, voices raised, gestures sharp. Some individuals attempted to direct or control the crowd, but their influence did not hold. Movement became unpredictable, pushing in different directions at once. The image carries a sense of instability, not war in the traditional sense, but something internal, something fractured. A darker and more abstract vision describes a shadow spreading slowly across the land. It did not arrive suddenly. It moved gradually, almost unnoticed at first. People continued their routines, unaware of the change. But as the shadow extended, it altered everything it touched. The atmosphere shifted. There was unease before there was action. Only when it was too late did people begin to react, and by then, the shadow had already settled everywhere. The feeling is not of immediate destruction, but of quiet transformation, something that changes reality without announcing itself. He also described transport changing form, a vision that stood out because of how unfamiliar it must have been to him. He saw movement that was faster, smoother, and no longer dependent on animals. Objects moved across land with unnatural speed, covering distances that would normally take days in a fraction of the time. There was no strain, no visible effort, only motion. This was not framed as progress or danger, simply as change, something inevitable and irreversible. Another lesser-known vision describes a divided path where people separated into groups without clear leadership. Some moved one way, others another, each convinced they had chosen correctly. There was no immediate conflict, but the separation itself carried weight. Once divided, the groups did not easily return to each other. The distance between them grew, not just physically, but in understanding. He also spoke of a structure standing firm while everything around it shifted, a building or system that did not collapse, even as the environment changed. People moved in and out of it, some seeking stability, others rejecting it. The structure remained, but its meaning seemed to change depending on who approached it. These visions were never anchored to specific dates or places. And that is why they continue to be reused, reinterpreted, and reshaped. Because they do not belong to one moment in time. They belong to uncertainty itself, adaptable, persistent, and always just open enough to feel relevant again. That is the final layer of Siener van Rensburg's legacy. Not that he clearly saw the future, but that what he saw could always be seen again, differently, by those who came after. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. We will appreciate further support. Please follow the link in the page bio and buy us a coffee.